Okay, everybody, so we have the schus of hearing now from the Goyim Bal Minchas Asher. I just want to say, especially shchach to the Rav. The Rav really shouldn't be here because he was supposed to be in America. The Chemed conference is at the end of this week. Some of you probably know all about that. It's the premier medical conference of the year, and the Rav uses the opportunity to do what he has to do in America. And he specially, that's what he told us, delayed the trip, so he should be able to have the opportunity to learn Torah with us as he has for 23 years.
So 23 years, Baruch Hashem, is a kivras derech. It's quite a while. 23 years ago, I was a young man. Many of you as well. Kodesh Baruch Hu Yazor. We should be able, all of us, to learn together in Yerushalayim 23 years from now. Let's have another 23 years and then we'll look forward. So I think for the past 23 years that I have the schus, the privilege to be Poiseach the Yarchikala, and this year as Yedid Nafshi and Rav Gottesman just told you, I had to change my plans in order to be with you, because to me, this is a great event. It's not that I lack opportunities to teach Torah. I do so in America as well, and I'm going to be giving many shiurim, but to me this is an annual event and a very special event when hundreds of Balabatim come from America for one purpose and one purpose only, just to learn Torah ba'avira de Eretz Yisrael. And to those of you that have somewhat of a memory, you don't need to have a great memory to recall that every year my opening remark is to see you here as an inspiration. But this year, it is even far more than that. This morning, I went to a Nichum Avelem visit with a Palei family in Ramot Daled. And I spoke to three beautiful, wonderful Yaldei Yisrael, Tinoike shel Beis Rabam shelo ta'amu ta'am chet. And I spoke to a mother that lost two children to a terror attack, and whose husband, Reb Avrom Noach ben Yehudis, is still badly injured. And to my terrible dismay and sadness, Yerushalayim Yir HaKodesh is the most dangerous place for a Jew to be in the entire world today. And by the course of human nature, you shouldn't be here. You should have been afraid to come. And your wives shouldn't let you come. Why come to a city in which there are terror attacks? And it's not the only one we had in the past month or two. But this is unique about Klal Yisrael. This is our home. This is where we should be. This is Eretz HaKodesh that HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised our forefathers. This is where we want to be, and no one will scare us away from our home. So just looking at this huge island, coming, sounds silly to say, but coming from the comfort of North America to the turbulence and the terror of Yerushalayim Yir HaKodesh is far more than an inspiration. Torah agune magne umetzule matzle. We trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are boteach b'schus HaTorah, and Be'ez Hashem, you'll all lechu leSholom, you'll all go safely home, and we should all be mevaseh Torah b'seiros toivos. So I want to dedicate today's shir l'Rafua Shalema, Reb Avrom Noach ben Yehudis, was a Choshev Talmid Chochem, a Talmud of mine, and he is the wonderful Talmud Chochem and a real Talmud Chochem that lost 2 children, and he needs a refuah shalema. So we're learning Torah, the refuahs, Rabbi Avram Noach ben Yehudis, and le'ilui nishmosam hatahira of Osher Menachem and his brother Yankov Yisrael, b'nei Avram Noach. The Torah we learn should be le'ilui nishmosam, v'lo yasham hashoid v'shevar, v'lo yitzvochu b'rachoi v'oseinu. Yerushalayim Ira Kodesh and the entire Jewish world should only know shalva, simcha, and nachas. So the sugya we will be learning in the coming few days is actually 2 different sugyas, as we see on the kuntris. Oni hamahapach b'charora, yored le'umnes chaveiroi. And I'm aware that today's shir is the psicha shir. You probably didn't delve into the depth of this sugya yet. Are these 2 different sugyas? Are one and the same? They cannot be one and the same because they have 2 different titles. Oni hamahapach b'charora and yored le'umnes chaveiroi. Not only 2 different definitions, 2 different sources. Oni hamahapach b'charora is a sugi in Kiddushin Daf Nun Tes Omid Aleph. Yored le'umnes chaveiroi is in Bava Basra Chof Aleph Omid Weiss. So what is the difference between one and the other? So just a very brief introduction. Kiddushin Nun Tes Omid Aleph, Oni hamahapech b'charora. When a poor man, and what exactly is the definition of an oni is not the essence of our shir today. That has many different sources, primarily regarding Masar Oni and Hilchas Tzedakah, and not necessarily the same definition in the halach of Oni hamahapech b'charora. But Oni hamahapech b'charora is a sugya of a poor man that is trying to acquire, to achieve, to buy something. Could be real estate, it could be an object, it could be anything. And another steps in, and he, as if, takes it away from Mr. Aleph. And at the end of the day, Mr. Bay offered a better price, and he achieved it. And the Gemara says, Nikro Rosha. It's not that the transaction isn't valid, but Nikro Rosha. It is something that shall not be done. And there is a machlokes, a fundamental machlokes between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Rashi says, we're dealing with hefker. And that is why the Gemara uses a lashon hamahapech b'charora. He's trying to pick something up from Rishus Harabim. Rabbeinu Tam says, if it's hefker, just a matter of luck. And as long as Mr. Aleph didn't make a proper Kenyan, anybody is entitled to try to be the first. The fact that Mr. A was the first one to see this object and he's rushing to pick it up does not prevent Mr. B, or I would prefer saying Aleph and Beis, to do the same. And everybody is entitled to try to retrieve or be kinda that object. So this halacha only applies to mekach umemkar, to business deals, and we tell Mr. Bays, go elsewhere. You want to buy a house, you want to buy an object, you want to buy a car, why do you need to step in when somebody is already negotiating and trying to buy it for himself, and he's in desperation? You are not. And therefore, according to Rabbeinu Tam, this halacha applies only to mekach umemkar. This is also a machlokes the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. Simen Reish Lamed Zayin, Sif Arishon, Seif Aleph. Shulchan Aruch brings both opinions. Yesh oimrim, that it is only b'mekach umemkar. Yesh oimrim afilu behefker. And whenever the Shulchan Aruch brings 2 different opinions, yesh oimrim v'yesh oimrim, one of the fundamental rules is halacha kebasra. Second opinion is the overriding one. So obviously the halacha according to the Shulchan Aruch is like Rashi, and the Ramah says, Shita Rishoyne Ikar, and the Ramah says with Rabbeinu Tam. This halacha doesn't apply to Hefker, it only applies to Masa Umat and to Mekach HaMemka, and we tell the second person, go elsewhere. You could buy a car anywhere. Look for another house, and don't step in and take it away from somebody that is negotiating. So this is a machlokes the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. Shalos Teshuvos Pnei Yeshua Samalamid Vav, and many other achronim side with the Ramah. So if we're dealing with Hefker, it's a free for all. And as long as Mr. A wasn't Zeicha, Mr. B is entitled to do the same. And how do we deal with the situation which is unique? It's not Hefker, but it's a one-time opportunity. So you live in Yerushalayim, and we have some shchunot in Yerushalayim, which the vast majority of families are chutznikim, and somebody is moving back, and he's selling his furniture, and it's a great opportunity. Special prices, it doesn't happen every day. So we can't tell Mr. B, you could go to the store, you could go anywhere, why do you need to step in and take it away from Mr. A? This is an opportunity. Well, as I mentioned before, in Ramat Eshkol every 2 weeks you have the same opportunity, so it would be like a Mekach Umemka. But we're dealing with circumstances which are unique, which are special, and they do not come up every other day. Or when a person wants to buy a house, and a neighbor says, this house means more to me. So we could tell Mr. A, you could buy a house anywhere, but Mr. B wants this house because it has special significance to him. He's a neighbor. So we're not going into the sug of Dina de Bar Metzah. There are many situations in which Dina de Bar Metzah wouldn't be an argument, but Oni HaMahapech B'Charara would. So Mr. B says, I know that Mr. A is negotiating, and I know he's a poor man, but he could go elsewhere. I can't, because I would like to have this house. Many achronim maintain that such a situation would be dumya de hefker, and according to Rabbeinu Tam, and the Ramah that paskins in accordance to Rabbeinu Tam, the din of Oni HaMahapech B'Chorah wouldn't apply, because it would be like Hefker. And by Hefker we paskin, there is no din of Oni HaMahapech B'Charor and Nikra Rosha. Shach, Reish Lamed Zayin, where this halacha is discussed in Shulchan Aruch Siv Koten Gimel, the Shach says, lo plug. And as in many, many areas in halacha, we say lo plug. The rule is the rule, and we do not take into account special circumstances. And if it's Mekach Umemkar, it has a din of Mekach HaMemkar, and a Mekach HaMemkar across the board, the rule is Oni HaMahapech B'Charara, V'bo Achar Nikra Rosha. So this essentially is the sugi of Oni HaMahapech B'Charara. Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam, Shulchan Aruch and Ramah. Does the rule apply to Hefker or only purchase? Mekach Umemkar. But what is unique in Oni HaMahapech B'Charara? It is not dealing with jeopardizing a person's parnasa. We're dealing with coincidence. We're dealing with a certain zechiyah or a certain purchase. Yored le'umnis chaveiroi is a totally different sugya. As I mentioned before, sugya number 1 is Kiddushin Untes, sugya number 2 is Bava Basa, Chaf Aleph. Yored le'umnis chaveiroi. And the situation we are dealing with is Bnei Mavoi. People live in the same little town, in the same shchuna. And one has a store in the Mavoi, and another wants to open up a similar business. Could he? Could shop owner number 1 prevent number 2 from opening a similar business? And that's a machlokes between Rav Huna and Rav Huna Brei de Reb Yehoshua. Both the same name, but 2 great Ameroim. And Rav Huna says, shop owner number 1 is ma'akev, and he could prevent another person from opening up a similar business, a similar store, a similar shop, and jeopardizing or diminishing his parnasa. Rav Huna Braider Reb Yehoshua says, no, it's free. Were Chazal socialists or capitalists? That's a very interesting question. They were neither socialists nor capitalists. They were Tanoim and Ameroim Kedoshim, but sometimes in Poskim, as you go down through the ages, you do feel that sometimes the fundamental political hashkafa and orientation, even of Gedolim, could affect their Piskei Halacha. I just want to give you a fascinating observation from a totally different area. Chok Haganat Hadayar. How is that defined in English? The law that protects not landlords, tenants. The law that protects tenants. So in most modern countries, there are laws, and socialists really uphold these laws, and capitalists don't like them. And in America, it depends state by state. There are different rules and regulations and laws. And two of the greatest poskim and gedolim of pre-Holocaust Europe have a very sharp machlokes. How do we relate to the laws that protect tenants? And they deal with two separate areas, which all fit into Chok Haganat Hadayar, the laws that protect tenants. Law number one, that limits the landlords, the landowners, how much rent they could raise every year. And in many cities, like New York, and I know this affected badly many of Anshe Shlomeinu, the authorities limit, you cannot raise rent more than a certain percentage every year. The house is mine. Does anybody have a right to dictate to me how I manifest my ownership of my own property? So that is one area of Chok Haganat Hadayar. And the other is, it's very difficult to evict a person that's living in a house even though he is not paying rent. And the law will stand on his side. So two of the greatest poskim, the Imre Yosher Meir Arak and Chavetz Eles HaShorin, who was Rav Ba'abad, family of the Minchas Chinuch, and he was the Rav of Tarnopol, and he wrote Chavetz Eles HaShorin. Both were the greatest Gedolim and the greatest poskim in Galicia. And the Imre Yosher says, Dina de Malchusa Dina. It is not Chamsenusa de Malchusa. I think a few years ago, our Yarchei Kala was dedicated to Dina de Malchusa. Well, in 23 years, we went through so many sugyas, I can no longer remember. You know, at this stage of my life, I never remember what I said, where, and when. I remember what I said, but I can no longer remember what, where, and when. But I think one of the years we dedicated the Yarchei Kala to Dina de Malchusa, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a fundamental rule. Dina de Malchusa Dina, Chamsanusa de Malchusa is not a Dina. So the Imre Yosher says, yes, these are humane laws, and they're right, and they're just, and we should uphold them, and Dina de Malchusa Dina. And the Chavetz Eles HaShorin says, these are the communists, the socialists, they are populists. The only reason these laws are in place is that they want the poor people to vote for them, and there are more poor people, tenants, than rich people, and it has no bearing in halacha, no room in halacha for these ridiculous laws. So, two gedolim, both gave piskei halacha, and one is, well, so vocally against these laws that protect the tenants, and the other supports them wholeheartedly. And these were the greatest gedolim in Galicia, the Imre Yosher Meir Arak and the Chavetz Eles HaShorin. So coming back to our sugya, Yored le'umnes chaveru, is it legitimate to encourage competition? Because ultimately, it is the consumer that wins out. So this is a machlokes between Rav Huna and Rav Huna Braider Reb Yehoshua. Could shop owner or business owner number one prevent others from competing? Shulchan Aruch is not that socialistic, and the Psak in Choshen Mishpat Siman Kuf Nun Hey Sivav is mutar einoi ma'akev halachic Rav Huna Braider Reb Yehoshua. Are there limits? Is competition always legitimate? Or does halacha have some checks and balances and some limitations? What are the circumstances in which you could compete with another person and maybe diminish or even destroy his parnos? So the Gemara in Bava Basra freita kasha marchiken mitzudes hadag. So fishermen have their nets in a certain area, in the sea, in the river. We prevent others from coming to the same area and spreading out their nets. So wouldn't this prove that b'nei mavoy ma'akvim ze ezeh? Doesn't this halacha prove that go elsewhere? You cannot compete and you cannot destroy someone else's parnasa. And the Gemara says it is different. The Yeheves Siyara. What does that mean? 3 different pshatim Rishonim, and each of these 3 pshatim has halachic bearing, has halachic implications. Rashi says the way the fishermen attract the fish is by putting a dead fish into the net, and that brings all the other fish together. Fish to us seem to be very peaceful animals, especially when you have them on your Shabbos table. Especially gefilte fish. They don't seem able to harm anyone. But fish are more carnivorous than any other animals, water animals. All fish eat each other, different than birds or mammals, in which not all are carnivorous, but fish are. So when you put a dead fish into your net, that attracts the others. And therefore, all the other fish is ke'ilu kvar nitzoido. It's not like customers. Human beings make choices, and they have the right to decide where they want to buy. Fish are different. And when the first group set out their nets, and they have the bait in their nets to attract fish, it is ke'ilu, those fish are already theirs. That's Rashi's explanation, Rashi's approach. The Ramban has a different pshat. And the Ramban says, what we are concerned, maybe some of the fish that'll go into net number 2 were already in net number 1. And fisherman number 1 was already kind of those fish because they were in his kli, they were in his net, and they are already his because he was kind of. And then they're going to leave net number 1 and swim out and go into another net. And therefore, that would be gezel mamish. Pshat number 3, I think it's the only source in which I remember a pshat quoted from the Rabbeinu Tam's father, whose name was Reb Moshe, Haram Avi Rabbeinu Tam. And his pshat is, you cannot take advantage of the efforts of another person to jeopardize him, to hurt him, and benefit yourself. So fisherman number 1, when he put the bait in his net, he attracted the fish from the entire river, from a mile away. And then you're putting out your net, and you are benefiting from his Torah, from his work, and you cannot do that. So these are the 3 different pshutim. Why marchikin mitzudas hadag would be different than opening up a store or a shop or a business and competing with number 1. The Ramban says, Gezel Gamur. Why would that be Gezel? The fact that fish are swimming in and out, wouldn't that be a chotzer she'ena mishtameres? And a chotzer she'ena mishtameres isn't koina. And even if a chotzer would be koina, if the fish swim out, they're no longer yours. Because in Churin Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph, the Gemara teaches a halacha tarnegoles shemordo paku kidushasa. There's a bird that belongs to Haggadah. So we're not dealing with Torah u'bnei yoina, but rather a hen or a rooster, tarnegoles shemordo. That's not kedushas mizbeach, because they didn't be makrev chickens al gabe mizbeach. So obviously it's kedushas bedek habayis. And people donated stuff to Bedek Habayis. Bedek Habayis was a huge enterprise. People brought second-hand stuff, and the Gizber sold stuff. It was like a second-hand business. So a person donated tarnagolim, chickens, leftovers, and one of them just flew away. Paku kidushasa, hegdish is nifka. Toises on the spot brings from Rabbeinu Tam, mekan hoichocha, that there's no difference between hegdish bedek habayis and the ownership of any individual. It's an enterprise, it's an ownership. So if a person has chickens and one of them just flies to spread out his wings and fly away, it's hefker. So even if we do assume some of the fish were in net number 1, but the moment they swim out of the net and they're free, why would that be different than tarnegoilis shemardo, which is hefker? So why does the Ramban say it's gezel gomer? I think we need to explain the Ramban. If not, you would spread out your net and put in your bait, the fish would have no reason to go elsewhere. So it's not like a chotzer she'ene mishtameres. It is as if you actively lured the fish and took them out of my net and into your net, and that would be gezel gomer. And in that case, we wouldn't say tarnegoilis shemarda. You are the one that bears responsibility. It is as if you got into my net and took my fish out, and that's why, according to the Ramban, it is gezel gomer. So the maskon of the Shulchan Aruch is Keshitas Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua. Competition should be encouraged. It's not an aveira. Put your act together, compete, be better than I am, sell for better prices, give better service. Ein b'nei hamovoy ma'akvim ze ala ze. That's the psak in Choshe Mishpat Kuf Nun Hey Sivav. Rimegash, one of the major Rishonim. He was considered the Rebbe of the Rambam, even though the Rambam was a little child when he passed away. But the Rambam saw himself as a Talmud of Rabbi Yosef Migash of the Rimegash, and in his Perush, and Bava Basra Chof Aleph, he says, Poskus chayusei legamrei, that is not legitimate. You could compete, but only if there's room for both of you. It's a big town, more than one shop could have parnasa, but if it's obvious that you're going to destroy his parnasa entirely and you're going to put him out of business, you cannot do that. And that would be considered an Isser. So we asked before, are we capitalists or socialists? Somewhat in the middle. Many great poskim throughout the ages except the psak of the Rimegash. Paskas chayusei legamrei, that is an aveira, and you're not entitled to do that. Shalas Teshuvah Sheres Yosef, Simen Yud Zayin, Masas Ben Yomen, Simen Chov Zayin. Anybody, any posik that learns halacha knows these great svarim. Tshuvas Chasam Sofer in 3 different tshuvas in Choshe Mishpat, Samach Aleph Ayin Tet and Kuf Yud Ches. Tshuvas Mariaz Enzel. You need to have a good memory just to remember the name of this Machaber. He was the greatest Talmud of the Ktsois HaChoshen. His name was Rabbi Kasiel Osher Zalman Enzel Tzazmir. That was his name. And his sefer is called Shalas Teshuvas Mahariaz Enzel, which is also Tevis. Yekosiel Osher Zalman Enzel, family named Tzazmir, Talmud of the Ktsois HaChoshen, and he paskins the same in Simen Samech Tes. Shoyla Meisha Madura Beis Chelak Aleph Simen Mem Daled Avnei Nezar, Choshe Mishpat Kuf Mem, Tshuvas Marsham Beis Chofei, notably for our generation, Igros Moshe, Choshe Mishpat Chelak Aleph Lamed Ches. You could compete, but only if there is reasonable room to assume both of you could have parnasa. Rav Moshe's psak is interesting, and Rav Moshe goes into details, and Rav Moshe says, business number 1 was extremely successful, and he became wealthy from his business, and now somebody comes to compete. As long as number 1 will be left with a parnosa beinonis, number 2 has the right to compete. Yes, his business will be diminished. Well, do your best to compete with me. I can't put him out of business, I can't destroy his parnosa, but if there's a reasonable chance to assume that he could have a Panosa Beinonis, then number 2 has the right to compete with number 1. Some Gedolim go far beyond that, including the Divrei Chaim, and they say if the halacha is ein b'nei movi ma'akvim zel zeh, this has no limitation. And even if number 2 would be better than number 1, better service, better prices, he has the right to do so. And number 1 is the one that bears responsibility. Put your act together. Be better than I am. And that's the psak of the Beis Ephraim, Shuvas Beis Ephraim, Semach of Zayin Choshe Mishpat, Divrei Chaim in 3 different Shuvas. Choshe Mishpat, Chelak Aleph, Semachov, Chelak Beis, Semen Mem, and Semen Nun Aleph. Are there other limitations and other considerations? Mordechai, Bava Basra Tov Kuf Ted Zayin brings in the name of Avi Yosef, one of the Rishonim, and he deals with a specific case in which one Jew, one Yid had a business. He was a moneylender. And that was a classical Jewish parnasa throughout the ages. Jews were moneylenders. And the anti-Semites took advantage of that fact, and they painted the Jews as greedy, as malvim beribis. They were the ones that imposed on us to be moneylenders because they didn't let us into any other vocation. They were the ones that prevented us from owning land, from being in other businesses. And it is only by necessity the Jews became moneylenders. So the Mordechai deals with a person that has a business, he's a moneylender, and his office or his shop is deep at the end of the alley. And somebody opens up a similar business right at the entrance to the Mavoi, and Mr. A says, nobody will come to me because they need to pass your place before arriving at my place, so you're putting me out of business. And the Avi Yosef Paskins, that in a case like this, we do prevent Mr. B from opening up a similar business. But he doesn't clearly define why would this be different than the Machloikis in the Gemara. Shnei b'nei mavoi. The Beis Yosef and the Darke Moshe, in our Siman, Kuf Nun Hey, have 2 different interpretations of the psak of the Avi Yosef. The Mordechai quotes the Avi Yosef. Mr. A has a right to prevent Mr. B, like Rav Huna says, B'nei Mavoi Ma'akav Olav. The Beis Yosef says, the Avi Yosef paskins ki Rav Huna, and therefore we disregard his opinion, because the Rif and the Rambam paskin in accordance to Rav Huna Breder of Yehoshua. So therefore we reject this psak. The Darke Moshe says no. The Avi Yosef agrees with the Rif and the Rambam. Halochik Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua. B'nei Mavoi ein ma'akven zeh. This is an exception. Why? Bori hezeika. Because the circumstances and the situation is such that Mr. A, it's not fair competition. He doesn't stand a chance. Because anybody walking into the street and he is in the need to borrow money will walk in to your store, your office, before even seeing that I exist. And because it's Bori Azeka, competition needs to be fair. And this is not fair competition. So that's the interpretation of the Darke Moshe. The alternative pshat would be, Paskis Chayusi Legamrei. So these would be 2 different principles, even though we paskin competition is legitimate, and we don't want to prevent competition, but it needs to be fair. And it needs to leave parnasa to Mr. A as well. I want to make a fundamental yesod, which is so essential. And before explaining what I want to explain, I'm just asking a silly question. If Henry Ford would come to a Beis Din and asking, I have a great idea. I have a dream which is called Model T. And I want to manufacture and produce the first automobile. What would Beis Din say? Henry Ford obviously didn't come to Beis Din because he was an anti-Semite. And I don't think he asked any Beis Din, but if he would. Obviously, thousands of people will totally lose their parnassa. The horse breeders, we won't need 10,000 horses. The whip producers, why would we need whips? And the wagon builders, they'll all be put out of parnassa. Would be paskin, you cannot do this. Paskas chayusa legamra bori hazeka. I know that Henry Ford produced the Model T. I don't know who made the first computer. But if we were to be asked, is it legitimate to make computers? It changed the world. Millions of people sitting in offices, writing, filling up notebooks, lost their parnassa. Oitzer HaChachma. Would we aser making Oitzer HaChachma? Well, anybody that writes Sforim knows that we sell less Sforim today than we did 30 years ago. Baruch Hashem, I still sell Sforim. I do. But many Machabrim don't. Because there's Oitzer HaChachma. So people don't buy Sforim. We have it all on the computer. Nobody has room in his house for Sforim because the Shas that was once 20 volumes morphed into 75. And if you want the Schottenstein and the Mesifta, that's 200. The Shulchan Aruch that was 10 volumes became 33. And the Tur for ages was 6 volumes and it became 21. And the Chumash that was 1 inch thick, every Chumash became 6 inches thick. Nobody has room for Sforim. So would we aser, Oitzer HaChachma, would we aser making computers? The first shopping mall, would we prevent that? Hundreds of little stores and McCulloch's needed to shut down. So what I mean to say, there is the natural course of events, and our world surges forward and not backward. And even if we would have the power to stop the world, we wouldn't do so. Because at the end of the day, it is about the yochid, about the consumer. It's about making the world better. I'm not sure all the things I mentioned made the world better. Looking back, probably it would be better to try to turn the clock back, but that is impossible. But what I mean to say is, there are areas in which competition is inevitable. It's inevitable. It's like nature. It's like derech hateva. And derech hateva is that people will always come up with new ideas and new improvisations and new technologies and new things that will inevitably change the world, and all the others will need to adapt or lose their businesses, and this is inevitable. So all these halachas of yored le'umnes chaveirei are in a day and age and in circumstances in which you have a store and I want to open a similar store, you have a little business and I want to open a similar business, and it depends where your store is and where my store is. It needs to be fair and all the other details. But it's a milta de pshita that from time to time there will be new inventions and new ideas and new technologies which will totally change entire branches of business. And if you don't adapt and you don't adapt, it is inevitable. You're going to lose your business. Everybody, not everybody, some of the people in this room don't remember what Kodak was. But there were days in which you could buy no camera besides Kodak. And then Fuji came up, and today it's all history. Kodak is history, Fuji is history. We remember the days we took pictures and it took a week to develop the negatives and get your pictures back. So would we change? There are things that we cannot change, and that is the nature of the world, and all this has nothing to do with the sugya of yored le'umnis chaveiroi. What is the source of the Isser of Yored Le'umnes Chaveiro? Is it a Gzeis HaKosev? Is it a Posuk? Or are they dealing with Svora Ba'alma? Two Gemaras that base the Isser of Yored Le'umnes Chaveiro, if there is an Isser. Because we just discussed at length, Zugin Bava Bas, the Machlokes Ravuna Breder, Rav Yeshua, and the Psakim Shulchan Aruch, that it is legitimate. Sanhedrin Daf Pei Aleph, the Gemara says, quoting a pasuk in Novi Yecheskel, Ve'es eishes re'eu lo timei, zeh hayored le'umnes chaveiroi. That sounds very harsh. The Novi Yecheskel b'divrei ha'teichocha, es eishes re'ei lo timei, zeh hayored le'umnes chaveiroi. Makes Chov Daled Omed Aleph quotes a pasuk in Tehillim Perik Tezvav, Loi aso l're'ehu ra, ze hayored le'umnes chaveiroi. Both are not Torah's Moshe. One is Nevi'im, and the other is Ksuvim. My Pshat, which I wrote in Shalas Tshuvas Minchas Osha, there are 3 Tshuvas in Minchas Osha dealing with the Suga of Yored le'umnes chaveiroi. Shalas Tshuvas Chelek Aleph Siman Kuf Aleph, Chelek Gimel Siman Kuf Hey Kuf Vav. And there's a big siman about Oni HaMahapech B'Charora in Minchas Osha Masechet Kiddushin. I don't recall which siman it is, but somewhere towards the end of Masechet Kiddushin. So I say, Es Eishes Re'eu Loi Timei, that is Poskes Chayusei Legamrei. Because Chas V'Sholem, somebody has a kesher with an Eishes Ish, he destroyed a family. And that is Poskes Chayusei Legamrei. That family could no longer be fixed. Eishes Ish Zunza Asura Lebala. Le'ose Le're'ehu Ra is any unfair competition. You're not going to put Mr. A out of business, but you diminish this parnasa, you hurt him, and that is what we learn from the Posuk and Tehillim, which is beyond Eseishes Re'ehu Loi Timei, and that is Le'oso Le're'ehu Ra. Are these droshes irrelevant? Because we paskin Ein B'nei Movoi Ma'akven Zeh Ezeh? So Pasuk number 1, according to my interpretation, is Poskes Chayus Legamrei, and many Achronim, as I quoted before, say this is not legitimate. But the Rambam in Hilchos Deos Perek Zayin Halacha Yud Aleph, and you should be familiar with Hilchos Deos. Hilchos Deos is mostly about Midas Toivus, not Halacha Psukim, but rather Midas and the way Talmidei Chachamim should act and react and interact. And the Rambam in Perek Zayin deans about a Talmid Chacham. And the Rambam says that Talmid Chacham should stand apart in many ways. In the way he speaks, in the way he dresses, in the way he interacts with people. One of the characteristics of a Talmid Chacham, writes the Rambam, Einai yored le'umnes chaveiroi. Rambam l'shitosoi. I quoted before the Rambam paskins Kerav Huna, and the Shulchan Aruch in the footsteps of the Rambam. Kerav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua. Ein b'nei movi ma'akvim zeh zeh. But it definitely is a midas chasidus, not to hurt anyone else for your private benefit. So the Rambam writes, one of the things that should characterize a Talmid Chacham is he is so careful never to hurt another. Ve'einoi yored le'umnes chaveiroi, and that is le'oso le're'ehu ra. Le'oso le're'ehu ra is not a tzivui. It's not a mitzvah to say, it's not a command. David HaMelech describes a tzaddik. The Rambam describes a Talmid Chacham, she'einoi yored le'umnes chaveiroi. We Yes. What the Gemara means to say that the Beis Din needs to care for a tzava merabanan and give him a special permit. But Talmidei Chachamim are careful not to hurt one another. We cannot finish this year without just briefly mentioning the concept of marufia, because you're going to learn marufia. What does marufia mean? It is a word which originated in Arabic, and loosely translated, it is a non-Jewish customer. And Jews dealt with non-Jews, and they had stable clientele. And in the days of the Rishonim, going back more than 1,000 years, in the days of Go'onim, in many kehilas, there were tekones prohibiting competition in this specific area of marufia. And Gedolei Yisrael didn't want Jews competing, fighting each other for the mercy of the non-Jew. And the non-Jew seeing Jews competing, who's going to have his money and who's going to have him as a customer. And that is the takana of marufia that we find in the Mordechai, Bava Basra, Tov Kuf Tezvav. And the Mordechai, being some Gedolim, said that it is illegitimate to compete on the non-Jewish customers. Others said it's no difference than any other Yored Le'umnes Chaveiroi. And once again, Kuf Non Vav Sifei, Kuf Nun Hei Sivav, we find both opinions. Is it different than any Yored Le'umnes Chaveiroi? Different in two ways. In most cases, marufia was a takana, and not necessarily based on Ikar Hadin. The other difference is, opening up a similar shop or a similar business is one thing, but turning directly to customers of another party might not be legitimate. And that's the takana of marufia. You cannot directly turn to my customers and try to take them away from me. So some Rishonim argue that would be like marchiken mitzudoi sadag. These are my customers. You cannot turn to them directly, like you cannot put a net right next to my net and take away my fish. These fish were already as if mine, and you are luring them into your net. So that is the difference between the specific area of marufia, which was a huge machlokes and Rishonim, to the general concept of competition of Yored Le'umnes Chaveiroi. Many Gedolim, from the days of the Rishonim till the Shulchan Aruch and even later Paskim, even were not against marufia, but many Poskim say this is an illegitimate practice. So coming back to our day and age, I quoted the Igros Moshe. The Igros Moshe said, Paskas chayusa legamra, if your business, if your store could put another Jew out of business, you cannot do that. Many Gedolim had a different approach. Two of the greatest dayanim in Eretz Yisrael were Reb Shlomo Tena, was a tremendous Talmid Chochem. He wrote a Sefer Shalas Shuvas Berachas Shlomo, Reb Shmuel Baruch Werner. They didn't achieve the acclaim and the fame of the Igros Moshe, but in the world of Dayanos and Eretz Yisrael, these are very well-known names. And in the Padarim, many volumes of Piskei Din from the Botei Din in Eretz Yisrael, they are very prominent. And in Berachas Shlomo, there's a psak of Reb Shlomo Tena, agreed upon, signed on by Reb Shmuel Baruch Werner and other Dayanim, and they paskin, as long as it's fair competition, it is always legitimate, even though Mr. A might be out of business. And as many economists say, at the end of the day, it is the consumer that will benefit, and therefore this is the nature of business. And this is the nature of commerce. And if we paskin b'nei movi eino ma'akvim zeh, it is legitimate. So in the words of introduction that I heard from Reb Gedalia when I was sitting down there, he spoke about the fifth Shulchan Aruch, about the sixth Shulchan Aruch. So we had a halachic discussion, and I also quoted the Rambam in Hilchos Deis. I think by mistake I said it was Perek Zayin, and I just recall as Perek Hey and not Perek Zayin in the Rambam and Hilchos Deis. So yes, competition is essential. It develops the world in every area. People are challenged to do their best, and we know that socialism or communism brought about the demise of societies and economies. But capitalism should be limited. I'm not talking politics now, I'm talking Torah, and I'm talking halacha. And as we saw today, even though the Shulchan Aruch paskins, ein b'nei movi ma'akvim zeh zeh, but many Gedolim feel Poskes Chiyusei is one concept, Bori Hazeik is another, competition needs to be fair. And it definitely is a Midas Chasidus, always going out of your way, trying not to hurt others, not to destroy others, even though it is your business you are entitled to develop. So whenever we have specific questions, Darkom Shel B'nai Torah, you consult with Talmidei Chachamim, you consult with Rabbanim and the Yonim just to know that you're doing the right thing. So, once again, my bracha to all of you. You should have a gewaldige Yar Chikala with no distractions. And Yehi Ratzain, Shakadosh Baruch Hu Shomei Tfilos, should be makabel all the tfilos of Klal Yisrael, with Tishkoi Ta'oretz. And we should know only simcha and nachas and besoros tovis, no more tragedy, no more bloodshed, no more avelis, no more little Yisayimim, and no more mothers and fathers mourning after their children. We should be zercha b'kura b'yomeinu to be as Mashiach tzedkeinu b'mehera v'yomeinu amen.